The complete truth about Palestine in the Bible, what most Christians have never heard. These days, the whole world is talking about Israel and Palestine. Headlines are full of it. Social media is buzzing with opinions and debates. Politicians and global leaders are discussing the topic everywhere. But what few realize is that there are 5 surprising biblical discoveries about Palestine. And the first reveals how it all began. Discovery 1. The origin of the conflict. To understand why there's so much conflict over that land, we need to go back much further than modern times. It all began with a family drama that changed the course of history. Abraham had 2 sons, Isaac, born of Sarah, the son of promise, and Ishmael, born of Hagar, the fruit of Abraham's impatience. In Genesis 16:11-12, the angel of the Lord said to Hagar, "Behold, you are with child and will give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Ishmael. He will be like a man of uncontrollability. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will dwell in the presence of all his brothers." The expression, "his hand will be against everyone," is not a curse, but a prophecy, an announcement that there would be continuous conflicts. Few people know, but many Arab nations claim to be descendants of Ishmael. The rivalry between the descendants of Isaac, the Jewish people, and the descendants of Ishmael, many Arab peoples, has shaped the political and spiritual history of the world for more than 4 millennia. In Genesis 17:19-21, God declares to Abraham, "Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. I will establish my everlasting covenant with him and with his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard your plea. I will bless him. I will make him fruitful and exceedingly numerous. He will be the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, the son Sarah will bear you next year." God therefore blessed Ishmael, promising him prosperity and a large number of descendants, but reserved the covenant of the land and the promise for Isaac. Thus the dispute over land is not just political, it is spiritual and familial, a conflict rooted in the beginnings of both lineages. And according to the prophecy, this conflict is not over yet. Discovery 2. The origin of the word Palestine. But the big question arises, if the conflict is between Isaac and Ishmael, between Jews and Arabs, where do the Palestinians fit into this story? The answer may surprise you. The term Palestine does not appear in the Bible as the modern world understands it. When we search the name in Scripture, it hardly appears, and when it does, it has a completely different meaning. In older versions of the Bible, such as the King James, the word translated Palestine is actually Philistia, which means land of the Philistines. For example, Exodus 15:14, "The peoples will hear and tremble. Terror will seize the inhabitants of Philistia." Joel 3:4, "What have you to do with me, O Tyre and Sidon, and all the coasts of Philistia?" In both cases, the original Hebrew term is Peleshet, which refers to Philistia, not modern Palestine. Philistia was the territory of the Philistines, ancient enemies of Israel. These Philistines were a seafaring people, probably from Crete or the Aegean regions, who settled on the Mediterranean coast, where Gaza and southern Israel are today, around 1200 BC. They were not Semites, they were not Arabs, and they were not related to the Israelites. They lived in 5 main cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. These names are familiar in Scripture. It was in Gath that Goliath, the giant defeated by David, was born. It was also there that Samson fought his battles and where the Ark of the Covenant was taken after being captured. The Philistines were technologically advanced, mastering iron when much of the region still used bronze. They were a constant and powerful enemy of Israel for centuries. But there is a decisive point that completely changes the story. The Philistines disappeared as a people. They were completely extinct. The Philistines and the true meaning of Palestine. The Philistines disappeared completely from history. Over time, they were absorbed by other peoples and cultures until they ceased to exist as a nation over 2,500 years ago. By the time of the Babylonian exile, they were practically extinct. And by the time the Roman Empire came to power, the Philistines were a distant memory. There is no genetic, cultural, or linguistic connection between the ancient Philistines and modern Palestinians. Nothing connects these two peoples. The Philistines spoke an extinct language, worshipped gods no one worships anymore, and their culture has completely disappeared from human record. So where does the name Palestine come from? If the Philistines ceased to exist millennia ago, why is their name still attached to that land? The answer lies in a shocking moment in Roman history. In 135 AD, Emperor Hadrian faced a major Jewish revolt, the Bar Kokhba Rebellion, the third Jewish uprising against Rome. The conflict was devastating. Hundreds of thousands of Jews died, and Jerusalem was again destroyed. Consumed by rage and determined to eliminate Jewish identity once and for all, Hadrian wanted to erase any connection between the Jews and their land. To this end, he changed the name of the region of Judea, the historic heartland of the Jewish people, to Syria Palestine. And this detail is important. He intentionally chose the name of Israel's ancient enemies, the now extinct Philistines, as a way to humiliate and mock the Jews. Think about it. It would be as if a conqueror invaded your country and renamed it after his worst historical enemy, a calculated insult. As if the United States were conquered and renamed British Loyalist territory in contempt of the American Revolution, or if France was invaded and called Greater Germany just to humiliate the French people. This is exactly what Rome did to the Jewish people. What Palestine really meant for nearly 2,000 years after this change, for almost 2 millennia, Palestine did not designate a people, but only a geographic region, as if we said South America or Middle East. The people who lived there were Arabs, yes, but they did not call themselves Palestinians. They identified themselves by their tribes, villages, families, and clans, like the Bedouins, for example. And here's a fact that surprises a lot of people. Before 1948, the term Palestinian was used primarily to refer to Jews living in the region. The newspaper, the Palestine Post, for example, was Jewish and would later become the Jerusalem Post. The Palestine Orchestra was also composed of Jewish musicians who later formed the Israel Philharmonic. During the British Mandate of Palestine, from 1920 to 1948, both Jews and Arabs lived in that land. But what we now call Palestinian national identity only began to form in the 20th century, especially after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. This does not mean that Arabs did not live in the region. They did. But the idea of a distinct Palestinian people with this specific national identity is something modern, emerging only in recent decades. Discovery 3. God's prophetic timeline for the earth. Now for something extraordinary, a biblical prophecy that predicted exactly what would happen to the people of Israel, both their tragedies and their triumphs. In Ezekiel 36:24, God declares, "I will take you from among the nations, gather you from all the countries, and bring you back to your own land." And in Isaiah 11:11-12 we read, "In that day the Lord will stretch out his hand a second time to rescue the remnant of his people, and he will gather the dispersed of Israel and the outcasts of Judah from the four corners of the earth." The first time was the return from Babylonian exile. The second is happening in our days. And then comes the prophecy of Luke 21:24, spoken by Jesus himself. "They will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." And so it was. For 197 years, from 70 AD until 1967 AD, Jerusalem was under foreign rule: Roman, Byzantine, Arab, Crusader, Mamluk, Ottoman and British, all except the Jews. But something extraordinary happened. In 1948, Israel became a nation again, for the first time in 2,000 years, fulfilling exactly what the prophecies had foretold. The rebirth of Israel, prophecy fulfilled. After 2,000 years of non-existence, Israel became a nation again in 1948. This was no ordinary political event. It was the fulfillment of prophecy. And in 1967, during the Six-Day War, something even more extraordinary happened. Israel recaptured Jerusalem. For the first time since 70 AD, the city of David returned to the hands of the Jewish people. Again, this was not just a military result, it was prophecy coming true. Discovery 4. Jesus' warning. Jesus left no doubt about what would happen to Jerusalem in the last days. He didn't speak in parables or metaphors. He was direct, precise, and prophetic. His words were a clear warning to all who believe. In Luke 21:20-24, he said, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, know that its destruction is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the city leave it, and let those who are in the country not enter it. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress in the land and wrath upon this people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive among all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." Jesus did not say if Jerusalem would be besieged, but when. He stated it as an absolute certainty. This prophecy had a partial fulfillment in 70 AD, when General Titus of the Roman Empire besieged Jerusalem, caused a famine, and then completely destroyed the city. More than 1 million Jews died, the temple was razed to the ground, and the survivors were scattered to the four corners of the earth. But there is something even deeper to this. This prophecy also points to the future, because Jesus said, "Jerusalem will be trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled." That word "until" is crucial. It indicates a limit, an end point. Gentile rule over Jerusalem would not be eternal, but temporary. And when that time came to an end, something extraordinary would happen. Part of this began to be fulfilled in 1967, when Israel retook Jerusalem. But the final fulfillment is yet to come, because the nations have not yet given up on this city. The prophecy of Zechariah. The prophet Zechariah, writing over 2,500 years ago, described exactly what we see today, centuries before the UN, modern Europe, or any global organization existed. In Zechariah 12:2-3, God declares, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling to all the peoples around it, when they lay siege to Judah and Jerusalem. In that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all peoples. All who try to lift it will be severely injured, and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it." Let's understand what this means. A cup of trembling. Something that causes dizziness, imbalance, confusion. The nations of the world will be stunned by Jerusalem. They will debate it, create resolutions, argue endlessly, but they will not be able to solve or control the problem. Does this sound familiar? The UN has passed more resolutions on Israel and Jerusalem than on any other conflict on the planet. Indeed, the nations are literally trembling because of this city. A heavy stone. Imagine trying to lift a stone that is too heavy. You try hard, you exhaust yourself, and in the end, you end up hurting yourself. This is exactly what the nations are doing to Jerusalem, trying to move what God has determined to be immovable. And God warns, all who burden themselves with it will be cut to pieces. It's not just failing, it's being destroyed and judged. And Zechariah adds something even more shocking. All the nations of the earth will gather against her, not just local enemies or regional neighbors, all nations. And this is exactly what we see forming in our days. The entire world, the UN, the European Union, international organizations, human rights groups, universities, media, and social networks, everyone seems obsessed with Israel and Jerusalem. A nation smaller than the state of New Jersey, with just 9 million people, has become the center of global attention. A nation of just 9 million people, smaller than the state of New Jersey, has received more attention than powerhouses like China. Zechariah 14:2 says, "For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished. Half of the city will go into captivity, but the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city." All nations, not some, not many, but all, will unite against a single city. But then something extraordinary happens. Divine intervention. Zechariah 14:3-4 states, "Then the Lord will go out and fight against those nations, as he fought in the day of battle. In that day his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which faces Jerusalem on the east. The Mount of Olives will split in two from east to west, making a very large valley. Half of the mountain will move toward the north and half toward the south. Jesus Christ himself will return to defend Jerusalem. His feet will touch the Mount of Olives, the very spot from which he ascended into heaven in Acts 1. At that moment, the mountain will literally split in two. The very geography of the region will be transformed when the King returns. But there is yet another warning we need to heed. Jesus spoke it on the Mount of Olives as he looked toward the temple just days before his crucifixion. Matthew 24:15-21 says, "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place," let the reader understand, "then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not turn back to get his clothes. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath day, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until now, no, nor ever will be. The abomination of desolation will be in the holy place, the temple." This reveals that there will be a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem during the end times, and that something or someone will desecrate it in a terrible way. Daniel had already prophesied about this. Daniel 11:31, "And forces will be on their side who will desecrate the sanctuary, the fortress, and will take away the daily sacrifice, and will set up the abomination that makes desolate." The Antichrist will interrupt the Jewish people's sacrifices, erect an image of himself, and demand worship. From that moment on, hell will break out on earth. Jesus said this will unleash unprecedented tribulation, something the world has never experienced, nor will ever experience again. Neither the Holocaust, nor the 2 world wars, nor any genocide or conflict in history will compare to the suffering that will come. And the center of all this will be Jerusalem. Jesus was very clear. In the last days, Jerusalem would be the epicenter of the final spiritual battle. Not New York, not Beijing, not Moscow, not Brussels, but Jerusalem. A city that, just 100 years ago, few would have been able to locate on a map. A city with no oil, no ports, no valuable natural resources, yet it has become the focus of end times prophecies. Why? Because this is not about politics. It's not about territory. It is the confrontation between God's purposes and Satan's rebellion. It's the clash between heaven's agenda and hell's resistance. It's about the king's return to the city he chose. Are today's headlines setting the stage for the Antichrist's alliance? Are current efforts for peace in the Middle East paving the way for the deception prophesied by Daniel? Could it be that the worldwide obsession with dividing Jerusalem will be precisely what brings about God's judgment on the nations? When we see the nations uniting against Jerusalem, and we are seeing this happen, when we see peace plans proposing the division of the city of God, and they are being discussed, as we observe, Preparations for the rebuilding of the temple accelerating, and this is already underway. Understand, you are not seeing politics. You are seeing prophecy being fulfilled before your eyes. The prophetic clock is ticking down to the last minutes before midnight. Discovery number 5, false peace and the beginning of the end. Everything we have seen so far converges on this point. The promises of the land, the conflict between families, the restoration of Israel and the dispute over Jerusalem. All of this leads to a decisive event, a false peace treaty that will usher in the last era. Daniel 9:27 says, "And he will confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he will cause sacrifice and offering to cease. And upon the wing of abominations he will make desolate. The spread of abominations will make it desolate, until the decreed destruction is poured out on the desolator. O Anticristo firmará acordo de paz de 7 anos. After millennia of wars and conflicts in the Middle East, someone will finally emerge, capable of brokering the treaty the entire world has been waiting for. Peace in the region, security for Israel, recognition of the Arab nations, and international approval. But this will all be a carefully planned trap. Revelation 11:1-2 states, "And there was given me a reed like a rod, and it was said to me, Rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship in it. But the court that is outside the temple leave it out. Do not measure it, because it has been given to the Gentiles, and the holy city will be trampled underfoot for 42 months. There will, therefore, be a rebuilt temple. Sacrifices will be offered again. However, halfway through those 7 years, after 42 months, everything will change drastically." 2 Thessalonians 2:4 explains, "Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself show self to be God." The Antichrist will enter the temple, interrupt the sacrifices, and declare himself God. This will be the time known as the abomination of desolation, the point at which the great tribulation begins and the final battle begins. A third temple, a peace treaty, and a devastating betrayal. We are much closer to this than we imagine. Many people are still confused about these events because they do not fully understand the book of Revelation. But imagine if there were a clear, accessible, and visual way to understand this entire prophecy, an animation that showed the apocalypse from beginning to end. Well, we created it because time isn't just passing, it's running out.